Hello Seekers, welcome back to the channel. First off, I'd like to thank everyone who has subbed to the channel, liked my mission statement, commented, followed on TikTok, feels inspired to make a difference, and shown any kind of love really. You are all beautiful, awesome people. I love you all, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm glad you resonate with my content. So let us embark on this journey together, hand in hand. And without further ado, let us get into the long-awaited Maharishi Effect video. Okay, before we start getting into what the Maharishi Effect is and all the evidence backing it, I want to quote this monk whose Quora post I stumbled upon whilst doing my research on the subject. I want you all to hear this because I think what he said is very important and addresses a glaring issue in our society's way of thinking. The monk is Steve Van Damme, professional monk with the zest for highest knowledge, from 1985 to present day. This is a post that he responded to in September 2019. He was responding to the question, is there any merit behind the claims that there is such a thing as the Maharishi Effect? He responded, the research backing it, over 50 studies, many published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, is certainly impressive if you look without preconceived notions and have an eye for statistics and science in general. If it were 1 or 2 or even 5 studies, it could be reasonably said that more studies are needed. But after 50 studies that just kept getting more and more rigorous with more compelling results, at some point, a truly rational person would say there is merit. It goes beyond the realm of a claim by then. The results speak for themselves, and it is up to naysayers to come up with a credible argument against it, not just a brush off. He then went on to say, but whether the phenomenon is accepted as a thing is another story. Certainly, the easiest and safest thing to do is just deny it. And one scientific journal actually implied doing just that in the introduction letter, saying the study followed all the protocols and was well executed, so there must be something wrong with the accepted fundamental tools of proving stuff in their field of study if it proves this thing. They basically said that their means of proof must be hopelessly flawed because they assumed the Maharishi Effect study couldn't be true. If the results follow the rules and you don't believe the results, change the rules? Denial in a scientific field is certainly not a new thing. He then quoted Max Planck, a scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. He then said, that is actually true about the population in general. We just have to wait for the next generation to see if they still have some flexibility in their thinking processes, to take a fresh, unbiased look. A commenter by the name of Ken Chalkin then added, another appropriate quote is, all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. Some think Arthur Schopenhauer said that, but it has never been confirmed. Regardless, it expresses a sentiment that has been discussed over the years. And as Ken Chalkin said, that is something that has been observed, repeated, and perpetuated throughout history. Every innovative step throughout history that breaks free from the norm has been dismissed and lambasted at every turn. And that brings me to my point. Why did I mention all of this? Because our societies have conditioned people to thoughtlessly engage in a skewed version of plausible deniability. What do I mean by that? If you search the term plausible deniability, the official definition will be, plausible deniability is the ability of people to deny knowledge of or responsibility for damnable actions committed by others in an organizational hierarchy because of a lack of evidence that can confirm their participation, even if they were personally involved in or at least willfully ignorant of their actions. This is not the sense in which I am referring to the term. If you look at the Urban Dictionary definition, this is what it says. A condition in which a subject can safely and believably deny knowledge of any particular truth that may exist because the subject is deliberately made unaware of said truth, so as to benefit or shield the subject from any responsibility associated through the knowledge of such truth. This is a little closer to the sense in which I am referring to the term. Another Urban Dictionary definition of plausible deniability is as follows: the idea that you can safely deny guilt or lie because no one can prove you did it. This is a little closer to the skewed layman application of the term. To accurately depict what I'm referring to, the definition would be as follows: the idea that you can safely deny a theory or information because no one can prove that information or theory beyond the shadow of a doubt on the spot, and that there is minimal commonly accepted information that contradicts said theory or information that has just been presented. In a lot of words, the tactics of naysayers, as Steve Van Damme alluded to, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this. The amount of conversations I've had in my life where I presented information that I had researched or learned to individuals who responded with naysaying, dismissing it as impossible or fake, and asking me to cite my sources without providing any rational counter-argument based on verifiable information and without providing any sources of their own. The sheer number is baffling. All of this to say, do not, and I mean do not, compromise any longer in a discussion where you have facts and evidence. Even if you can't cite the sources off the top of your head, do not compromise or back down at any naysayers simply stating that sounds fake or there's no way that's true or works. It's 2020. They need to upgrade their brand of logic. We have facts and evidence, and as Steve Van Damme said, if they are skeptical, it is up to them to convince us with tangible empirical data, not the other way around. Unfortunately or fortunately, I had to learn that the hard way after many discussions with friends where their only argument was, it doesn't make sense to me, so I don't believe that. I actually had a friend adamantly reiterate to me after I explained some neurological facts to him about the brain that I had learned in my psychology class, I only believe what makes sense to me. It's 2020. We don't stand for that anymore. That is the definition of closed-mindedness. Now that that is out of the way, let's get on to the facts and evidence regarding the Maharishi Effect. So what is the Maharishi Effect? In 1960, Mahesh Yogi, an Indian guru, developed Transcendental Meditation technique. He predicted that 1% of the population practicing the TM technique would produce measurable improvements in the quality of life for the whole population. This hypothetical influence was later termed the Maharishi Effect. So what is Transcendental Meditation? The Transcendental Meditation technique, or TM, is a form of silent mantra meditation. The meditation practice involves the use of a mantra and is practiced for 20 minutes twice per day while sitting down with one's eyes closed. To produce the Maharishi Effect, however, it is not required to meditate twice per day. More on that later in the video. The following information can be found on research.miu.edu/Maharishi-effect under the Maharishi Effect tab. Link in the description. There is literally so much information and evidence regarding the Maharishi Effect that it would really be quite grueling for you all and I if I were to recount it all. I think this quote regarding the Maharishi Effect explains it well. I think the claim can be plausibly made that the potential impact of this research exceeds that of any other ongoing social or psychological research program. It has survived a broader array of statistical tests than most research in the field of conflict resolution. This work and the theory that informs it deserves the most serious consideration by academics and policymakers alike. David Edwards, PhD, Professor of Government University of Texas at Austin. So I'm going to summarize some main points. However, I will link in the description every single piece of evidence I found relating to the Maharishi Effect. A quick note, there have been over 600 scientific research studies conducted at more than 200 independent universities and research institutions in 30 countries that have demonstrated the profound benefits of Maharishi's Transcendental Meditation and TM Shidi program for all aspects of individual life and well-being of society. The studies have been documented in over 5,000 pages of scientific research on Maharishi's Transcendental Meditation program, collected papers of volume 1 through 5, Volumes 6 through 7 are in progress. Okay, so the phenomenon known as the Maharishi Effect was first noticed in 1974 and reported in 1976. The finding was that when 1% of the population practiced TM, the crime rate was reduced by 16%. The following information is from maharishi-programs.globalgoodnews.com/Maharishi-effect. In 1975, Maharishi inaugurated the dawn of a new era, proclaiming that through the window of science, we would see the dawn of the Age of Enlightenment, which is what is occurring now with the Age of Aquarius. Scientific research found that in cities and towns all over the world, where as little as 1% of the population practices the Transcendental Meditation technique, the trend of rising crime rate is reversed, indicating increasing order and harmony. Research scientists name this phenomenon of rising coherence in the collective consciousness of the whole society the Maharishi Effect, because this was the realization of Maharishi's promise to society made in the very early days of Maharishi's movement, started in Madras, India in 1957. The Maharishi Effect establishes the principle that individual consciousness affects collective consciousness. Nearly 50 scientific research studies conducted over the past 25 years verify the unique effect and wide-ranging benefits to the nation produced by the Maharishi Effect. These studies have used the most rigorous research methods and evaluation procedures available in the social scientists, including time series analysis, which controls for weekly and seasonal cycles or trends in social data. Research shows that the influence of coherence created by the Maharishi Effect can be measured on both national and international levels. Increased coherence within the nation expresses itself in improved national harmony and well-being. In addition, this internal coherence and harmony generates an influence that extends beyond the nation's borders, expressing itself in improved international relations and reduced international conflicts. Research has shown that groups of individuals practicing TM and yogic flying, all enjoying very high brainwave coherence, create coherence in the collective consciousness and generate a unifying and integrating effect in the life of the society. This results in a decrease of negative trends throughout society, such as crime, accidents, and sickness, and an increase in positive social, economic, and political trends. Scientific studies on this phenomenon have demonstrated that a group of at least 7,000 individuals practicing TM and yogic flying can produce this coherence, creating an effect on a global scale, reducing violent and negative trends worldwide. Research studies have repeatedly confirmed the Maharishi Effect on a global scale. For example, during assemblies of 10 days to 3 weeks in which the number of individuals practicing the TM Shidi program of yogic flying approached or exceeded the square root of 1% of the world's population at that time, about 7,000 people, global social trends improved immediately, including improved international relations as measured by reduced international conflict and reduced incidences of terrorism. If you're wondering what yogic flying is, that is a whole other video in and of itself. All you need to know right now is that it was developed by Maharishi and it's a part of the TM Shidi program. But it's basically psychic stuff, so we'll definitely be getting into that later on the channel. I'll also make a video about Maharishi and his life and how he came to create all of these techniques, because it's really interesting. I might just consolidate the two and make them one video. The following evidence is data from the summaries of 13 Maharishi Effect published studies. In 1978, a group of 7,000 individuals over the course of 3 weeks were meditating in hopes of positively affecting the surrounding city. They were able to literally transform the collective energy of the city, which reduced global crime rates, violence, and casualties during the times of their meditation by an average of 16%. Scientists estimated that the coherence generated by group practice of the TM Shidi program should be proportional to the square of the number of participants. Taking into account the 1%, it was predicted that a group with the size equal to the square root of the population would have a measurable influence on the quality of life of that population. So as you can see, All these studies are confirming each other's findings. The TMCD program was practiced in large groups on numerous occasions in the following decade, and the first statistical analysis was published in 1987. These showed a decrease of about 11% in violent crimes in Washington, D.C., in total crimes in Metro Manila, and in total crimes in the Union Territory of Delhi. The p-values of these three effects were 0.01, 0.005, and 0.001, which are excellent results in social science research. Subsequent research has confirmed the existence and universality of the Maharishi effect. It has become possible to lodge a prediction in advance with the police and the mayor of a city, and then to create the effect. This was put to the test by a review board in 1993 Washington, D.C. The statistical probability that this result could reflect chance variation in crime levels was less than 2 in 1 billion. Another study conducted in America took 24 cities with populations over 10,000 with 1% or more of the population practicing TM by 1972. These experimental cities were compared to 24 control cities selected by an independent investigator based on years of prior data. Matching variables were population, college population, and geographic region. In the control cities, less than 0.7% of the population had learned TM. Stepwise discriminant analysis showed that 1% cities and control cities were similar per capita income, percentage of 15 to 29-year-olds, stability of residence, unemployment percentage, and percentage of families under the poverty level. The study examined change in the FBI crime index in 1973, the year after 1% cities reached 1%, and studied the changes in crime rate trend for 6 post-intervention years from 1972 to 1977. Change in crime rate in 1973 was assessed by the difference in the actual 1973 crime rate from the level predicted by linear regression on the 6-year pre-intervention baseline period from 1967 to 1972. Change in crime rate trend was assessed by comparing the slope of regression on the post-intervention period with the slope for pre-intervention period. In 1973, there was a significant decrease in crime rate by 24% in the 1% cities relative to the control cities. In addition, the post-intervention slope of the crime rate trend for the 1% cities decreased compared to an increase in the slope for the control cities, p-value smaller than 0.025. During the post-intervention period, the mean slope of change in crime rate for the 1% cities was not significantly different from 0, while the slope for the control cities was significantly greater than 0, p-value smaller than 0.0001. Because this study took place in a period when cities of this size were increasingly complying with the FBI standard for reporting the Uniform Crime Report Index, a second analysis was conducted on a reduced sample of 20 1% cities and 20 control cities, which showed a sudden increase in crime that might have been an artifact due to a change in police reporting procedures. The results for this reduced sample were similar to the whole sample. A 22% decrease in crime in the 1% cities in 1973 compared to an increase in crime by 2% in the controlled cities, and a reduction in crime rate trend in the 1% cities by 89% compared to an increase in crime rate trend by 53% in the controlled cities, p-value smaller than 0.05. In addition, a significant correlation was found between the percentage of TM participation in each city in 1972 and crime rate change in 1973. This study demonstrated that the Maharishi effect has immediate effect on crime, as well as long-term effects that persisted over 6 years, which was independent of the influence of major demographic variables known to affect crime. The following evidence is pulled from the uncarvedblog.com, The Power of the Collective by John Hagelin. The following studies were conducted by John Hagelin, PhD. He is a quantum physicist, educator, public policy expert, and one of the world's foremost proponents of peace. He is the director of the Institute of Science, Technology, and Public Policy, and International Director of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace. This is a short excerpt of The Power of the Collective by John Hagelin. A remarkable series of scientifically credible studies has shown a link between group meditation and lowered incidents of violence and crime. And why not, argues Hagelin. If meditation is good for the individual, it should also be good for the collective. From June 7th to July 31st, 1993, up to 4,000 participants of Mahesh Yogi's Transcendental Meditation and TM Shidi programs gathered together in Washington, D.C. to form a group for a government global demonstration project. Under the direction of Dr.John Hagelin, violent crime in Washington, D.C. was significantly reduced as predicted during the time of this World Peace Assembly. The study presenting these findings was published in Social Indicators Research. What follows is a report of that study, presented in the context of a talk Dr. John Hagelin gave in a Holland videocast to Noetic Sciences Regional Conference on February 18, 2007 in Tucson, Arizona, titled A New Science of Peace: The Effects of Group Meditation on Crime, Terrorism, and International Conflict. The editor of Shift magazine excerpted, abridged, and edited that talk into this article, The Power of the Collective, for their June-August 2007 issue on the mystique of intention. We are living in an epidemic of stress. Doctors report an alarming rise of stroke, hypertension, and heart disease, now called metabolic syndrome, all of which are diseases of stress. As a result, we would expect to see stress behavior in society, and it turns out there is plenty of it: crime, domestic violence, terrorism, and war. Since meditation provides an effective, scientifically proven way to dissolve individual stress, and if society is composed of individuals, then it seems like common sense to use meditation to similarly diffuse societal stress. A reduction in crime and stress-related behavior would then be expected to follow. Nobody would have ever guessed, I wouldn't have guessed, the extraordinary degree to which you can reduce social violence through meditation, because it doesn't take everyone meditating to generate profound effects. A relatively small number of people meditating together has a powerful spillover effect, reducing stress throughout a surrounding area in a measurable way. That's the phenomenon I want to focus on. That's where the really interesting physics and metaphysics can be found. We will discuss the physics and metaphysics that Dr. John Hagelin is referring to in a moment. A study I conducted in the summer of 1993 in Washington, D.C. shows rising crime levels over a period of 6 months, which takes place every year as the temperature gets hotter between the winter and the summer. People stay out later, they are more aggravated and agitated, they get into more fights, and the crime rate goes up. This is an absolutely known annual trend. From June through July of that summer, we brought to the area a large number of practicing meditators and trained quite a few others. When the group reached a particular size, 2,500, ultimately reaching 4,000, which was about halfway through the period, there was a distinct and highly statistically significant drop in crime compared to expected rates based on previous data, weather conditions, and a variety of other factors. We collaborated with the local police department, the FBI, and 24 leading independent criminologists and social scientists from major institutions, including the University of Maryland, the University of Texas, and Temple University, who used highly sophisticated research tools to control for variables such as weather. Everyone ended up agreeing on the language, the analysis, and the results, and those results were quite astonishing. We predicted a 20% drop in crime and achieved a 25% drop. Just before the study, the Washington, D.C. Chief of Police went on television and said something like, "It's going to take a foot of snow in June to reduce crime by 20%. But he allowed his department to participate in the experiment by collecting and analyzing the data. In the end, the police department signed on as one of the authors of a published paper. See Social Indicators Research 47153-201, June 1999. In this case, it was only a few thousand people in a city of about 1.5 million, so a relatively small group was influencing a much larger group. This was so fascinating, and it has implications for more than just crime. In in my opinion, the most immediate implications today in the world are stopping ethnic wars, the conflict in the Middle East, and so on. And, in fact, a similar experiment was done during the peak of the Israel-Lebanon war in the 1980s. We found that on days when the number of meditators were largest, and also on the subsequent day, the levels of conflict were markedly reduced by about 80% overall. This turned out to be a statistically significant effect and also a surprising one, because there were only about 600 to 800 people meditating in the midst of this entire conflict and the highly stressed surrounding population. The results were published in Yale University's Journal of Conflict Resolution 32766-812, December 1988. Which also published a letter urging other universities, collaborators, and groups to repeat this study. The editors felt that the implications of this were so far-reaching, so fundamentally important, that it must be repeated to test the likelihood that the results were a statistical fluke. And that's exactly what happened over the next 2.25 years. During this 821-day period, 7 subsequent experiments were performed to examine the effects of group meditation on the Israel-Lebanon war. These groups gathered in Israel, in Lebanon itself, in the actual conflicted neighborhoods, and at locations throughout the Middle East, Europe, and other parts of the world. In each case, when the size of the group reached the threshold that was predicted, based on previous research, to have an effect, there was a marked and statistically significant reduction of violence. We have also found in other studies that in the geographic vicinity of such a meditating group, people experienced physiological changes, increased EEG coherence, reduced plasma cortisol, increased blood levels of serotonin, biochemical changes, and neurophysiological changes as if they were meditating. When you put all of these studies together, the likelihood that the reductions of violence were simply coincidental, a statistical fluke, was less than 1 part in 10 million, that is 10 to the 19th power. An overwhelming number of papers documenting more than 60 different experiments of group meditation's effect on conflict have been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals that have the most stringent standards for research. I believe it is the most rigorously established and thoroughly tested phenomenon in the history of social sciences. Around the same time, as a companion piece, Baran Balitzis interviewed Dr. John Hagelin for the Ions Online Intention downloads. It is truly spectacular. To elaborate and elucidate on the subject, Baran asked some great questions on the differences between meditation and intention. Dr. John Hagelin's brilliant replies really took this current intention debate to a deeper, more comprehensive level of understanding, equating intention with thought, distinguishing between thinking and consciousness, and how one can enhance one's intentions multifold from a deeper level of consciousness. You can listen to the 23-minute interview published on June 26, 2007 by clicking on the link titled Intention Download Interview in the description. You can also click on the link titled Download in the description to download as an MP3, and the link titled View Transcript to view a typed transcript of the interview. However, I will share a piece of it right now. Here is their introduction to that interview. In this interview, quantum physicist and former presidential candidate John Hagelin explains the difference between intention and consciousness, which opens the door on a fascinating discussion of how spending time in deep meditation in the nuclear level of thought can multiply the efficacy of intentions. Residing in object-free consciousness connects us to a field of pure, unlimited creative potential, which in turn ripples out through the quantum field, affecting our lives and even large systems in positive ways. He cites studies he has been involved in showing that a critical mass of meditators has correlated with significantly lowered crime rates. He also predicted similar effects on complex systems, from hurricanes to stock markets, with positive results so far. Scientific study of such effects is gaining steam, and his ambitious Invincible America Assembly project plans to take this work to the next level. training a critical mass of meditators to positively affect the rates of violence for the entire planet. Okay, so much for a summary, right? I would highly recommend you read for yourself the entire article or listen to the interview because it is very, very fascinating. Also, Mahesh Yogi and physicist Dr.John Hagelin both created global movements to organize people to come together and meditate for global peace. More on that in the video regarding Maharishi Yogi, in which I will also talk about the brilliant Dr. John Hagelin. Links to the website are in the description. Okay, so that basically sums up what the Maharishi Effect is, what results it can produce, and the evidence to back the claims. However, as I stated earlier when quoting Dr. John Hagelin, there is a fundamental aspect of physics and metaphysics that lies at the core of this phenomenon, and now it is finally time to explore that. The following information is an excerpt from the rest of the article, Strings and Space-Time with Dr. John Hagelin. There is a fundamental principle called constructive interference. It has to do with the coherent influence of multiple radiators, such as when more than one loudspeaker or radio antenna is playing the same music. In a later video, I will go over how our brains function like radio receivers. To continue, the individual sound waves from each source combine to make a bigger wave. The power is proportional to the square of the height of that combined wave. Therefore, the radiated power when you move loudspeakers together grows in proportion to the square of the number of loudspeakers. In this case, you get the power of 9 loudspeakers by moving 3 of them together. The same will be true with any group of coherent radiators, whether loudspeakers, antennas, or a number of people meditating, which helps explain why only the square root of a certain percentage of a population is enough to have a repeatable and demonstrably measurable effect on, in the case of our meditation assemblies, rates of violence. In the United States, the square root of 1% of 300 million citizens is only 1,732 people. But how do we have such an influence on one another at a distance? There are no clear answers yet, but I believe that the clue lies in the notion that beneath the physical levels of human existence, our bodies and the quantum realm of molecules, atoms, quarks, and leptons is a unified field of pure, abstract, universal consciousness. It's at this level of reality, this level of non-local mind, where you discover that the qualities of space are, at least in theory, capable of accommodating extraordinary experiences. As you get way down there, space starts to change. It starts to roil and boil in what's called space-time foam. And in this space-time foam, there is continual frothing and upheaval of space-time geometry. Wormholes get created. These wormholes do not obey Einsteinian causality. You're able to influence things in the past as well as the future. In addition to the particles and forces we know and love, gravity, electromagnetism, and so forth, there are additional forces and particles that we don't see, but they fill the room. It was once thought that these were irrelevant to human life because they only interacted with us gravitationally, which is too weak to be of any interest. But if you do the calculations properly in the context of the superstring, you find that they also interact with us electromagnetically, even if rather weakly. This means that surrounding us in this room is a dimly lit world. Dimly lit from our perspective, not dimly lit from its perspective. We are dimly lit from its perspective. And in that dimly lit world, there may be, and probably are, bodies and objects and things, and some very interesting mechanisms that we don't have in our observable sector world, and yet are very effective radiators or communicators over vast distances. This is not science fiction. It is demonstrable using the mathematics of superstring theory. A physics of subtle bodies, of thought, is emerging that is very new, very exciting, and suggests additional mechanisms for long-range interactions between people. It suggests that we live in a predominantly flat space, and that this space is crisscrossed by shortcuts that provide paths of instantaneous communication across vast distances, even into the past or the future. If we assume that at our core level of being, we are all intimately connected in a unified field where we are all one, it becomes very easy to understand how we influence one another. And When we contact this unified field of being, we enliven that unity, that harmony, and that coherence in the collective consciousness of society. And by doing so, everybody seems to flow more harmoniously together. The following information is an excerpt from Maharishi-programs.globalgoodnews.com/Maharishi-effect. The secret of the global Maharishi effect is the phenomenon known to physics as the field effect, the effect of coherence and positivity produced from the field of infinite correlation, the self-referral field of least excitation of consciousness, the field of transcendental consciousness, which is basic to creation and permeates all life everywhere. Through the Maharishi effect, extended Maharishi effect, and global Maharishi effect, with positive trends and harmony rising in individual and national life, the problems of the nation will disappear, as darkness disappears with the onset of light. The Maharishi effect, like the phenomenon of the Meissner effect in physics, establishes the principle that individual consciousness affects collective consciousness. A universal principle in nature is that internally coherent systems possess the ability to repel negative external influences, while incoherent systems are easily penetrated by disorder from outside. This principle of invincibility is clearly illustrated in the Meissner effect and in the functioning of a nation as the Maharishi effect. Okay, so quickly, what is the Meissner effect? The following information is from an antidote to violence.org/Maharishi-effect. It appears to be a principle in nature that internally coherent systems possess the ability to repel external influences, while incoherent systems are easily penetrated by disorder from the outside. This is what happens with the Meissner effect. In 1933, two German physicists, Walter Meissner and Robert Ochsenfeld, discovered the Meissner effect, a phenomenon occurring in certain metals at exceptionally low temperatures, and typified by a total absence of magnetic infiltration. In an ordinary electrical conductor, incoherent disordered electrons allow penetration by an external magnetic field. In a superconductor, coherent collective functioning of the electrons spontaneously excludes an external magnetic field and enables the superconductor to maintain its impenetrable status. Physicists working with Maharishi have suggested that the Maharishi effect may work in an analogous way to the Meissner effect. This is a quote from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. As individual consciousness grows, collective consciousness rises, and as collective consciousness rises, individual consciousness grows. Individual consciousness is the basic unit of all levels of collective consciousness: family consciousness, community consciousness, national consciousness, and world consciousness, influencing them all and being in turn influenced by them. To continue, if the influence is positive, then life proceeds harmoniously. If individual tension and stress spread into the collective consciousness unchecked, then a negative influence is created in society, generating further tension and stress in the individual. This increased stress can be measured by an increase in homicides and accidents, both of which correspond to less order or coherence in the collective consciousness, which, if not dealt with, can eventually boil over into social unrest, violence, and loss of life. Another quote by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi: "The cause of inner and outer conflicts with which life on earth has for so long been plagued lies not in the variety of life's expressions, but in man's failure to infuse that variety with the unity, the infinite correlation, which lies at the source of all diversity. This failure is in turn due to lack of knowledge." Basically, separation is an illusion. The following information is another excerpt from an antidote to violence.org/Maharishi-effect, titled A Physical Explanation of the Maharishi Effect. First, the human mind, including consciousness and reflective thought, can be explained by activities of the central nervous system, which in turn can be reduced to the biological structure and function of that physiological system. Second, biological phenomena at all levels can be totally understood in terms of atomic physics, that is, through the action and interaction of the component atoms of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and so forth. Third and last, atomic physics, which is now understood most fully by means of quantum mechanics, must be formulated with the mind as a primitive component of the system. Harold Morowitz. Quantum field theory has led an increasing number of scientists and philosophers to think that a unified field theory could shed light on our understanding of consciousness. In 1994, the editors of the journal Consciousness Studies wrote, "There is an increasing acknowledgement within the scientific community that there are some striking parallels between the properties of consciousness and those of quantum systems. The attempt to develop a physical theory which links the two together is one of the hottest areas of consciousness studies at the moment. This is an exciting view, but hardly a new one, as by 1994, Maharishi had already been discussing similar ideas with leading scientists for over 20 years, beginning with parallels between the least excited state of the quantum field, the vacuum state, and the least excited state of consciousness, transcendental consciousness. For instance, the vacuum state is empty of excitation, yet full of virtual particles, while transcendental consciousness is perfectly silent, but also the source of all change. And complete mathematical knowledge of the vacuum allows physicists to reconstruct all values of the excited states, while transcendental consciousness, described by Maharishi as the home of all laws of nature, allows transcendental meditation practitioners to experience a field of all possibilities. Both, incidentally, are described as states of perfect balance. Maharishi maintains that such parallels are more than just interesting analogies, suggesting a fundamental and ultimate identity between consciousness and the unified field. He comments, "Infinite creative intelligence belongs to the unified field of natural law, which we understand to be the field of our own self-referral consciousness, our own transcendental consciousness. This level of intelligence is a field of all possibilities because it is from this level that all streams of natural law spring to create the infinite diversified creation and maintain the evolution of everything." According to Maharishi, natural law is the sum total of all the laws of nature that govern the universe, the holistic value of all the laws, and the source of all order in the universe. Elsewhere, he writes, "The unified field and its self-referral dynamics is the basis of the entire diverse creation, and therefore cannot ever be forgotten or lost, being consciousness, fully awake within itself. It cannot ever forget itself, it cannot ever be lost." In yet other writings, he explains that when the human mind settles down and identifies with pure consciousness, another term for transcendental consciousness, then this is equivalent to experiencing the unified field, which also forms the basis of collective consciousness. The unified field is that Planck scale level of nature's functioning, from where time is generated, from where space is generated, from where energy is generated, from where all the laws of nature begin to take their specific shapes. When the human mind settles down and becomes identified with that level of infinite orderliness, then it becomes consciously stationed at the basis of the universe. This is how we can gain the support of all the laws of nature for our every thought and action. And this is how we can radiate an influence of peace and coherence throughout the environment. By enlivening that basic field of infinite orderliness and harmony in one place, we enliven it everywhere. Maharishi maintains that consciousness, rather than matter, is fundamental. Other physicists have drawn similar conclusions. These are some of their comments. Subject and object are only one. The barrier between them cannot be said to have broken down as a result of recent experience in the physical sciences, for this barrier does not exist. Erwin Schrödinger, one of the founders of quantum theory. The common division of the subject and object, inner world and outer world, body and soul, is no longer adequate and leads us into difficulties. Werner Heisenberg, founder of quantum theory and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. The stuff of the world is mind stuff. Arthur Eddington provided experimental evidence of Einstein's general theory of relativity. Mind no longer appears as an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We are beginning to suspect that we ought rather to hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. James Jean, a mathematician from Cambridge University. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as a derivative of consciousness. Max Planck, Nobel laureate and regarded as the father of quantum physics, the Big Daddy. Subject and object are only one. The barrier between them cannot be said to have been broken down as a result of recent experience in the physical sciences, for this barrier does not exist. Eugene Wigner, Nobel laureate, discovered fundamental principles of symmetry in nature. I presume that he was quoting Schrödinger when he said this. Stated that both relativity and quantum theory imply the need to look on the world as an undivided whole, in which all parts of the universe, including the observer, his instruments, merge and unite in one totality. In this totality, the atomistic form of insight is a simplification and an abstraction, valid only in some limited context. David Bohm, theoretical physicist. The self-referent quality of consciousness, and with it, the multiple coexisting levels of poetic, non-logical, non-linear, mutually contradictory thoughts and feelings characteristic of the human mind, are much better modeled by non-communicative, self-referent operator dynamics of quantum theory than they are by classical dynamics. E.C.G. Sudarshan, nominated 6 times for a Nobel Prize. F scientists as a whole who denounce an idea. This should not necessarily be taken as proof that the said idea is absurd. Rather, one should examine carefully the alleged grounds for such opinions and judge how well these stand up to detailed scrutiny. Brian Josephson, Nobel laureate for discovering the Josephson junction. The doctrine that the world is made up of objects whose existence is independent of human consciousness turns out to be in conflict with quantum mechanics and with facts established by experiment. Bernard d'Espagnat, theoretical physicist at CERN and the Sorbonne. Mind is inherent in the way the universe is built. Freeman Dyson, mathematician and physicist. The need for mentality to be ontologically fundamental in the universe. Roger Penrose proved that black holes could be formed from the gravitational collapse of dying stars. The unified field is a non-material, self-interacting, self-aware, dynamic field of intelligence, which is equivalent to saying that it is a field of universal consciousness. It has all the fundamental characteristics of consciousness. John Hagelin, CERN physicist and expert on string theory. Continuing from an antidote to violence.org, such a diverse roll call of physicists, a roll call that is by no means exhaustive, does suggest that theorizing an intimate connection between physics and consciousness is not unreasonable. Okay, so here's a little bit of information regarding Dr. John Hagelin. Dr. John Hagelin received his doctorate from Harvard University under Howard Georgi, who, together with colleague Sheldon Glashow, developed the grand unified field theory. His scientific contributions in the field of electroweak unification, grand unification, supersymmetry, and cosmology include some of the most cited references in physical sciences. In recognition of his outstanding achievements, he was honored for his promising work in particle physics in the development of the supersymmetric grand unified field theory and named recipient of the 1992 prestigious Kilby Award, which recognizes scientists who make significant contributions to society through science, technology, innovation, invention, and education. While he has published many scientific articles on unified quantum field theories and related topics, he is also a world expert and pioneer of research on human consciousness. A quote from Dr. John Hagelin. Once time and distance have become ill-defined, the classical notion of causality has no meaning. The three fundamental pillars of rational deductive logic, time, distance, and causation, have crumbled. Our purely intellectual objective approach to gaining knowledge, which has led us to ever more fundamental space-time scales, has transcended its own methodology. Physics has walked the plank. A quote from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi: "We know if we drop a stone in a pond, the ripples begin to move, and they move over the whole pond, reaching all the extremities. One slight stir in any part of the pond stirs the whole pond, influences the entire field of water and its surrounding. Similarly, by every thought, word, and action, every individual is setting forth influence in his surroundings, and that influence is not restricted to any boundaries. It goes on and reaches every level of creation. Every individual, by his every thought, word, and action, shakes the entire universe. This is the status of an individual. One is connected with the whole universe by every little bit of activity. An individual appears to be bound by the boundaries of home and by the boundaries of his own body, but in reality, the subtle aspects of the individuality go to make the universal existence. An individual is never an isolated individual. He is intimately interrelated with the whole cosmos. Even more than that, he shares the responsibility for the life of the whole cosmos. The entire universe lies in the individual. Cosmic existence lies in the existence of the individual. Cosmic life rests in the individual life, and the individual life extends to cosmic life. The individual and the cosmos are interdependent. Neither of them is independent of the other. Every move of the individual shakes the cosmos." Here is an interview with Dr. John Hagelin where he answers various questions regarding the unified field.
I'm going to go back to something you said about in the film, the integration of quantum and the neurology and that sort of the biology part. Because we purposely in the film kind of left that vague so that people could put it together for themselves. And they're very interested in the science behind that. How do you see them fitting together?
Well, you did a very nice job in fitting them together in one way in the film. And that is both really see both of these disciplines, modern quantum physics and molecular biology, neuroimmunology, they both say that we do create our own realities and that we have a lot of responsibility over the world in which we live, at least the way we experience the world and the way the world behaves towards us. That's a very good connection, actually. That was brilliant. Ultimately, what we'd like to see is, what is the physics of consciousness? We can ask that question today. What is consciousness? Where does it come from? What are the origins of consciousness? What are the limits of human potential? We're in a position to actually answer that now, I believe, although there's certainly not consensus yet in the scientific community about that. But with the real cutting-edge knowledge, the discovery of the unified field, the so-called superstring field, we now understand that life is fundamentally one. At the basis of all life's diversity, there is unity. At our basis, you and I are one. And that unity, at the basis of mind and matter, is consciousness, universal consciousness. So with that deep understanding that consciousness isn't created by the brain, it's not purely an outcome of molecular chemical processes in the brain, but is fundamental in nature. It's the very core of nature. We call it the unified field. Now that we have that foundational understanding of what consciousness is, we can solve the mind-body problem. We can see how consciousness percolates up through our physiology to become the consciousness that we experience and see and sensory perception and all of that. So there is a foundation now to really link rigorously neuroscience with quantum physics. That might be really a next step in the development of the movie. You've asked the questions in the first movie. Now we're just on the verge of being able to answer those questions.
So you mentioned the unified field. For people who a lot of people are going, well, that sounds nice, it's unified, everything's one. Could you dive a little more technically into what the unified field is?
Progress in our understanding of the universe through physics over the past quarter century has been exploring deeper levels of natural law, from the macroscopic to the microscopic, from the molecular to the atomic to the nuclear to subnuclear levels of nature's functioning, so-called electroweak unified scale, grand unified scale, super unified scale. And what we've discovered at the core basis of the universe, the foundation of the universe, is a single universal field of intelligence, a field which unites gravity with electromagnetism, light, with radioactivity, with the nuclear force, so that all the forces of nature and all the so-called particles of nature, quarks, leptons, protons, neutrons, are now understood to be one. They're all just different ripples on a single ocean of existence. That's called the unified field or superstring field, and it's a mathematical tour de force. But we have realized Einstein's dream. He dedicated half of his life to discovering this unified field, and now in the context of the superstring, that has been achieved. So unified field theories based on the superstring identify a single universal field of intelligence, an ocean of existence, at the basis of everything, mind and matter. And all the so-called particles of the universe, the forces in our universe, everything in the universe are just ripples on that ocean of existence. That's the unified field. And that field is a non-material field. It is ultimately the field of consciousness. And all our separate consciousness, wherever there's consciousness, is merely consciousness by virtue of the fact that my consciousness, your consciousness, are ultimately that. Everything in the universe is really nothing but that. Planets, trees, people, animals, we're all just waves of vibration of this underlying unified superstring field. We are really united at our core. And ultimately the understanding that's emerging will be that there is only one consciousness in this room. And it is you. And it is me. And it is each and every one of us. We individualize our consciousness through the filter of our nervous system. But the consciousness itself, our very inner subjectivity, the self in the big sense, that is universal. And knowing that, knowing it through experience, is called enlightenment, and has been called enlightenment through the ages.
It sounds like you're going down through the physical realms, leptons, smaller, and you're saying at the base, it's not solid, it's intelligence. Why do you use the word intelligence?
That is a very brilliant question. What you're saying really reflects a bias that all of us share. Everyone who's grown up in the scientific world is used to the concept that we're living in a material universe, an inert universe, a universe of dead matter. And because of that, it's difficult instinctively to grasp that we're not really living in a dead universe, that the universe is overwhelmingly conscious at its basis. See, what we have seen and studied for 300 years of classical physics is what we call billiard ball mechanics, macroscopic physics, classical physics, the physics of billiard balls, cannonballs, and planets. But quantum mechanics, even at the molecular level, let alone atomic, nuclear, subnuclear, in the realm of quantum mechanics, the idea of particle is replaced by the idea of wave function. And what is a wave function? Technically, it's a vector in a linear space. Well, what's a vector in a linear space? What's it made of? What's the substance of nature? Well, a wave function, a vector in a linear space, is made of the same stuff thoughts are made of. We're really living in a thought universe, a conceptual universe. Quantum mechanics is just the play and display of potentiality. So the point I'm making is the deeper you go in the structure of natural law, the less material, the less inert, the less dead the universe is, the more alive, the more conscious the universe becomes. Then when you get to the foundation of the universe, the unified field or superstring field, it's simply a field of pure being, pure intelligence. Intelligence because it's the fountainhead of all the laws of nature, all the fundamental forces, all the fundamental particles, all the laws governing life at every level of the universe have their unified source in the unified field. That makes the unified field the most concentrated field of intelligence in nature. Non-material, dynamic, self-aware intelligence. Those are the properties of the unified field.
Could you also use the term, because I've read this someplace, some people were saying at the bottom, it's also information. Is that kind of similar, or is that another way to describe the same thing?
It's very similar. I'd say the quantum world, quantum mechanics, is really the play and display of information, the play and display of potentiality, waves of information, waves of potential electron. And it's important, the word potential. This isn't the world of electrons, it's the world of potential electrons. But when you have to ask the question, waves of what, really? What is the field that is waving? Is it the ocean? No, it's a universal ocean, an ocean of pure potentiality, an ocean of abstract potential existence. We call it the unified field or superstring field. And that's what we're made of. So, as you said, the tighter physics have tried to grasp onto physical reality, to understand what it's really made of. What are the core building blocks of life? At the basis of it all, life, the universe, slips through your fingers. And you come up with something that's increasingly abstract to come to the realm of pure abstraction. And that's what the unified field is. It's pure abstract potential, pure abstract being, pure abstract self-aware consciousness, which rises in waves of vibration to give rise to the particles, the people, everything we see in the vast universe.
That was great. I got
awesome.
Goosebumps on that one.
Why? I know this is a big question. I'm never going to answer it, but I've always asked this question of all the people that I keep talking to because it seems so obvious to me. Most of what you're saying, it just seems very natural. Why are we not educating? How did we get so? If the Vedics seem to have it right such a long time ago, how did we end up here? You know.
Boy, that's a good question. How is knowledge lost? The knowledge of enlightenment can easily be lost. The techniques to experience pure consciousness, unbounded awareness, can easily be lost, not because they're difficult or complicated, but because they're so subtle. Very interesting. In order to transcend, to experience unbounded awareness, consciousness has to settle down completely. Now, if you try and reproduce that experience, you'll never succeed, because trying involves effort, and effort keeps the awareness active and the comprehension from expanding. That's why a very delicate technique is involved and personal instruction is involved. It's easy, it's natural, but it's delicate. And it's easy to lose it, and I'm afraid it has been lost completely. It's being revitalized again and again throughout history. Of course, Maharishi's own life is dedicated to teaching as many people as possible how to transcend and regain that experience. But unfortunately, we have a society with a certain momentum. We have generations of teachers who've gone to teachers' education or members of teachers' unions that don't always support educational innovation. So it may take a generation, unfortunately, it may take a generation. Now that simple techniques, universal, non-sectarian, scientifically verified techniques exist to gain enlightenment, it still may take a generation before these life-saving technologies to develop consciousness are reintroduced into education.
You said non-sectarian. Does that mean like non-religious? Is that what you mean by that?
The experience of pure consciousness really transcends any one religion or any one philosophy. It's as scientific as it is religious. It is, after all, a state of functioning of the brain, maximally expanded comprehension. It's the direct subjective experience of the scientifically discovered unified field of all the laws of nature. Is that religious? Perhaps, but it's scientific too. So there's no reason that it should be disbarred from education. Otherwise, we're going to get the same old result. 5% development of our mental potential, another generation of war and terrorism and human cruelty. And that'll go on forever until the experience of life's essential unity is bestowed and the brain is properly developed.
You know, we talked to Jeffrey Satinover and Hammeroff, and I think maybe one other physicist said the same thing, that because you talk a lot about the observer, and they sort of said that that whole concept of the observer was a mistake and it's been fixed and it doesn't really mean anything now. What about that?
It's true. There's a deeper level of perspective in which the observer does not yet exist, not separate from the observed. The reality of life today is all unity. Unified field which unites observer and observed in one indivisible wholeness. Scientifically, we call it quantum measurement theory, and the ultimate inseparability of the observer from the observed. In the language and science of consciousness, we call it the unity of knower and known in the indivisible structure of pure knowledge, the experience of oneself, the Atman. And what is the self? The self, consciousness, our very subjectivity, is that one thing in our life that has never changed. Intangible though it may be, and very difficult to put your finger on, it's that one aspect of our experience that has been with us since childhood. Although our beliefs have changed, our friends have changed, our bodies have changed, typically for the worse, that one thing that gives that continuity to our experience day by day, that's our consciousness. It's our subjectivity. It's the Atman, the self. And that self, which is the same for you as for me, ultimately, is this unified field discovered by science, which is essentially the creator of the universe. That is our authority. That's our dignity. If we only knew ourselves and how precious it was, we would rush to experience higher states of consciousness, where that experience of our unbounded subjectivity is never lost, even during the depths of sleep.
I still don't understand.
That's okay.
I still don't understand. Can I have you rephrase the question?
Yeah, it's good. It wasn't a very clear answer. Rephrase.
I'm just telling you. What I don't understand is that some people over here, some of the scientists said the observer is not part of the equation.
Right.
And yet, people like you are saying that focused intent affects matter.
Right.
I want to understand those two disparate views.
Okay.
Yeah, what he said.
There are different truths because our universe is hierarchically structured in layers. The atomic has its own truth. The nuclear world has its own completely different truth. And they're both valid. They're both self-consistent. So there's the truth of diversity, where observer and observed are separately identifiable systems. And there's the deeper truth of unity, in which there is no separation between the observer and the observed. So we can talk about life at all levels. Each level is valid, but the deepest level in this scientific age is the level of unity. What has to be very clear about this is a concept most people don't get quite. It's very important. You can drag me across the floor by my arm. You can drag me across the floor by my atoms, or by my nuclei, or by my cells. It all has the same effect. I get dragged across the floor. These are simply different levels of the description of the one reality that is me. So it's legitimate for us to talk about a world of diversity. We see such a world after all. But it's even more legitimate for us also to talk about the world of unity, the ultimate scientific truth of life. So we get tripped up in semantics if we say that unity alone exists, but there's no such thing as diversity, or that diversity alone exists, there's no such thing as unity. They're both true. They're just different levels of description of the same reality.
So, you know, you talk about me and you are one, but we're also separate. Those are just different levels.
Different levels. On the physical level, you and I are separate. You're much better looking than I am, more attractive in virtually every way. But at deeper levels, we have a common source. And that is the unified field, the scientifically discovered unified field. That is the source of you and the source of me, the source of gravity, the source of electromagnetism, the source of quarks, the source of leptons. Everything in the universe is a common source. So if we look at things at the deepest possible level, we ultimately discover one unified universal reality, of which you're a wave, of which I am a wave. We're all just the different vibrational frequencies, the natural reverberant frequencies of this one universal unified field. Our whole universe is just a symphony. The various, harmonics and fundamentals and overtones of one universal field, one universal ocean of consciousness in motion.
So let me ask this. I'm just trying to understand all this stuff. So does that place come from the Planck scale? Or is it...
Yes.
Wow, really?
Yes.
I totally understand it for the first time. Oh my God, I'm so excited.
The Planck scale is that small distance scale, 10 million times smaller than the atomic nucleus, where all the forces come together, where all the particles come together as one, where you and I come together as one reality, where distance, where causality no longer exist, and there's one unified, indivisible wholeness, which is the unity of consciousness, the unified field of all the laws of nature.
If you're still skeptical about the idea of collective consciousness, I'm going to link a London Real interview with Dr. Rupert Sheldrake talking about morphogenic resonance. I would include it, but I feel as though that would incur a copyright strike, so yeah. There will also be a link to a full-length documentary with Dr. Rupert Sheldrake about morphogenic resonance in the description. And yeah, that about covers it. If you've made it to the end of the video, watch the whole thing, or just watch the section regarding the science and the evidence behind the Maharishi Effect and the unified field. Hopefully, with all that evidence, as Steve Van Damme said, the truly rational individuals that you are understand that the Maharishi Effect has been tested and proven beyond the shadow of a doubt, and that TM and global meditation are not only real tools, but most likely the most effective tools in fighting against crime and improving the human condition for years to come. Hopefully you understand now what I mean when I say that you possess the power to make a difference where you are as you are, because we all do. Every single human being on the planet, just by being a human and meditating, can make an impact on themselves, their fellows, and thus humanity as a whole through a rippling effect due to the fundamental interconnectedness of our nature as human beings and the fundamental nature of reality as observed by quantum mechanics. If you think I'm crazy, or if you recount this information and someone thinks that this is crazy and that these ideas are crazy, my only recommendation is to iterate the facts that these ideas were formulated by some of the most brilliant minds to grace our planet, and that these ideas have been around since the ancient Egyptians, Mayans, Sumerians, and Atlanteans. So to claim that all of this is crazy and unfounded is to claim that the most brilliant physicists, mathematicians, and ancient civilizations, etc., knew nothing of what they were talking about, and that they, in their infinite wisdom, have an understanding which is superior to their life's work and extensive research, which said person is entitled to, however. I think you all know where I'm going with this. When I initially began this, I had no real idea of how long it would be. I just went with the flow and compiled what I thought would be the most relevant information to the subject, and this documentary/movie was the result. My apologies if you were expecting something significantly shorter. However, it could not be avoided in creating the most comprehensive video to date with all of the information regarding the Maharishi Effect. If you enjoyed this documentary or found it informative, please inform others of the Maharishi Effect, the unified field, i.e. the collective transcendental consciousness, and the societal benefits of global meditation. Please get this information to as many people as you can, whether it's sharing this documentary or simply telling them, as I'm certain the rational, critically analyzing thinkers that you are surely and fully understand now how much of a difference we can truly make through this and how much power to make a difference we truly have. We need as many people as possible to periodically and consistently, if not every day, come together to create this effect and make a substantial positive change for our planet as a whole to finally usher in an era or millennium of peace, lest we let history repeat itself and perpetuate its history of war and misery that we have seen plague our world. That about wraps it up. A quick note, however, a lot of people have asked me to make a video about meditation, so that will be the next video I make, and hopefully I'll release it in a few days. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next video, seekers. Thank you for watching. Spread the word. Meditate. I love you all. Lakat Chalakin and Namaste.
Vocal percussion on a whole nother level, coming from my